What is up, my Squirtleites? It is I, your king, and today we're taking a little bit of a break from the Season of the Deep main quest to dive into, pun intended, another activity that released alongside Season of the Deep, the Ghosts of the Deep dungeon. And one of my favorite dungeons in Destiny history. I am so excited to talk about this with you guys, but not only is it one of my favorites, this is a dungeon that finally realized the dream of many a Destiny player dating all the way back to 2017 when this game first came out. But before I jump into any of those explanations, I'm going to let Sloan take it away with some opening narration.
Guardian, there's massive energy readings surging from below the Arcology. All communication channels are affected. The Lucent Hive are forcing their way through from the Ascendant Plane. There's something else going on. The formations I'm seeing are indicative of some kind of mass ritual to Guardian.
And we lost her. All right, if we're going to dive deeper into the Arcology, we're going to need to get through this Hive barrier, and to do so, we're going to need to dunk vestiges of light into these Thrall statues all around this central area. And to do that, well, let me explain. As soon as the fight starts and you start killing those knights, a bunch of acolytes are going to spawn in, and then eventually an ogre. This ogre is going to be the start of the chain. Once the ogre dies, a bunch of Hive slime, I guess, is going to spawn on the ground. You're going to need to follow that trail of slime to the next group of enemies, usually denoted by a bunch of wizards, but also by a symbol that is hanging in the sky above those enemies. As you can see, it's directly ahead of me. My team always calls that symbol the hamburger symbol, but people got other names for it. That's just what we've always called it. We all have our own funny names. They have official names that are more in line with the actual Hive iconography, but those are too complicated. We just tend to go with our own call-outs, and so I'm going to call it the hamburger. Anyways, we're going to follow this hamburger symbol all the way to the end by killing each and every enemy below it, and once we do so, the symbol is going to move to the next location. When we get to the final location, you're going to know that because a Hive Lightbearer is going to spawn this time instead of just a bunch of wizards and acolytes, and that Hive Lightbearer is the one that you need to kill. But not only do you need to kill it, one of the three team members needs to crush the ghost, because they are then going to get that vestige of light buff that I was talking about a minute ago. So we're going to show this right here, because I do believe I'm the one grabbing the buffs in this recording. I'm going to smash the ghost. You can see up on the top just below the health bar is Vestige of Light. It's got a 1 minute and 20-second timer. Thankfully, you can sparrow across this place, which does make navigating it a whole lot easier, especially when you get stuck on a tree, like I just did there. But we're going to want to head all the way back to the Thrall statues. Waiting for us there is going to be an Ultra Health Bar Hive Wizard, and that is the enemy you're going to need to kill before you dunk anything. Once it dies, Deep Sight Resonance is going to be activatable, and that is going to not only reveal a bunch more Thrall statues, but also reveal the symbols on the statues. All you need to do is dunk the Vestige of Light into the appropriate statue that has the symbol that was hanging above the groups of enemies that you just killed. Sounds complicated, it's not. You kill Ogre, you follow trail, you kill 3 waves of enemies, final wave has a Hive Lightbearer, crush the ghost, get the buff, come back, find out which Thrall statue has the symbol, and dunk the buff in that statue. That's it. You just have to do this 4 times. And once you have done that, you have unlocked the door. Now, I did say 4 times, not 3, which is usually the magic video game number. But no, we have to do it 4 times because this dungeon is an endurance test if ever there was one. And you're also going to see me cut a few times, mainly because my team actually gets lost here. Now, that's kind of funny, actually, because we're doing this dungeon like more than a year after it actually released in this footage. And the problem is that we just hadn't run it in a very, very long time, so we kind of had lost familiarity with the place a little bit by this point. So you're going to see that we know how to do the dungeon well. We just get lost sometimes, and it's going to make for some sort of silly footage in that regard. But for the most part, it's pretty self-explanatory. Now, like I said, this is an endurance test, but it's mainly true with this opening encounter, the first traversal section, and then the closing encounter. But you have to understand that this was at a time where Destiny players were getting so good at the game, and our abilities were getting so strong that survivability was such a non-issue that Bungie needed a way to just decimate its players. And so this dungeon is a massive step up in terms of the damage that is dealt out, the number of explosions that happen everywhere, the number of things that are just actively trying to blow you up at all times. So they really needed to test players' ability to stay alive this time around. And so not only did they do so by just throwing all manner of enemies at you in this dungeon, which, to be fair, they were kind of already doing in the Season of the Deep activities, but they really needed to make you test your limits by making these activities long in the tooth. So I understand why they did it. It makes this dungeon on a first playthrough quite a challenge and a lot of fun. The only problem is that it kind of falls apart in terms of replayability, just because the more you play through it, the more you realize, oh yeah, this is without a doubt the longest dungeon in the entire game. And so upon successive playthroughs, it does get a bit old. So I understand that criticism. But that one issue aside, I love this dungeon. It's such a fun one to play through. It's got so many iconic set pieces. It's just fast-paced and constantly active. And I think to this day, still very fun to play. But could it have used some shortening? Absolutely. In fact, even Bungie knew that, because in a later released version of this dungeon for a specific seasonal event that came later on, they actually did shorten it. They shortened this encounter down to only 3 phases instead of 4, and they also shortened the final encounter, which we'll talk about when we get to that, because I don't want to actually spoil it. But because this is so long, I'm actually going to do something I haven't done in any previous dungeon episode before, and I'm actually going to cut out some sequences here. So you're only going to see us do 3 phases here. I'm going to cut out the 4th phase entirely in this opening encounter, and then the rest of this episode is just going to be the super long opening traversal encounter, while I explain some other things about this dungeon. Now, why is this dungeon so important? Why is it such an iconic dungeon for so many reasons, and why were players so excited for it when it came out? Well, that's because of the setting. When Destiny 2 first launched, the Red War campaign, which I've gone on record and said I don't think is very good, but some people have fond memories of it, the Red War campaign was kind of known for its massively untapped potential. It had a lot of really cool locations, it had a lot of really cool ideas, but none of it was very fully realized because you didn't spend a lot of time in each location, nor did you get to kind of do much with them. You kind of just walked from place to place, killed a small pittance of enemies, and then that was the mission. That was kind of how the entire Red War campaign was structured, and Titan was no exception to this. But Titan, I think more than any other location in that campaign, really left an impression on players. I mean, just look at the place. It's so beautiful. It's just this big ocean, I was going to say planet, but it's a moon, a big ocean world that is covered in, it's covered in water, but it's also got these abandoned science facilities, and it's just kind of this peak sci-fi aesthetic. A lot of people really wanted to see more, but Titan only had a handful of missions, a couple of adventures, a strike, and then it had exactly 1 mission that was set inside the Arcology itself, which most players would say was the most fascinating part of Titan. And so when we only got that 1 mission, which saw you going into the Arcology, commandeering a tank, using the tank to break out of the Arcology, and then just never coming back outside of very small side quests, it really disappointed a lot of players. People wanted to see more out of this place. Well, on the horizon of that mission, and this is kind of set up with the opening cutscene of the dungeon, but once you parked the tank, jumped out and got in your ship, you saw off in the distance that there was so much more to this Arcology place, that it was this gigantic facility that we could explore more of, and we really wanted to, but unfortunately Bungie just never gave us that opportunity until now. This place is legitimately right on the horizon of that mission. It's the very same place that you could see when you hopped out of that tank, and now we're finally going deeper into it with this dungeon. So I think that's a very cool payoff. It's definitely something players wanted for a very long time, and in a lot of ways, it definitely succeeded. Like I said, when this dungeon came out, everyone loved it. Like, it didn't have any complaints whatsoever. It really wasn't until players kept running it and, was just farming loot in it that they started to sort of feel its length. And I think that's really the only context in which players aren't the biggest fan of this dungeon, but I wouldn't really call that a criticism of any more than just the replayability of this dungeon. Everything else about it is just fantastic. Now, as we go through this place, I do want to make mention of that symbols mechanic, because it is important to all of the encounters in this dungeon, but for varying degrees. As we go into more of the traversal section, it's more going to just kind of be like the deep dives, where you're running through these big open sections where you're going to have to kill enemies, and then you're also going to have to go through these underwater sections where you're going to need to watch your pressure gauge, grab the bubbles. You get the idea. However, the dungeon does kind of take it to another level. So the bubbles don't respawn nearly as frequently as they do in the deep dives and in salvage and in some of those other multiplayer locations. And not only that, some of these underwater sections we're about to go through are quite lengthy, so you really need to be paying attention to where bubbles are and making sure you don't get lost as you make your way through these areas, which does kind of lend a little bit of tension to them, and we're going to see that here really soon as we clear out this group of enemies. We just need to do so to get this barrier to dissipate, and once that happens, we'll be able to head back down into the water. So, let's dive in, literally. And one thing you're going to probably want to do as a fire team is stick very close together. Unless you know exactly where you're going, you're going to want to stick very close together because, much like in the deep dives and in the salvage missions, if somebody grabs a bubble and you're all very close to each other, you all get the benefits of that bubble. But if you're far apart, someone's going to miss out on it, and in a lot of cases in this area, that's probably going to kill you. Now, this opening room has a lot of bubbles to grab from, which is why I don't really worry about it too much, although I did just miss one, so now I'm going to make sure I have to grab one on the way down or I will die. But you're going to really want to make sure and pay attention as to where you're going, because sometimes the bubbles can be very spread apart. Like as we head into this area, there's only like, I think, 1 or 2 in the upper area, and there's like 1 in the lower area that you can grab, and that's really it. So you kind of need to be in a hurry and really paying attention as to where they are. So I'm already about to die here. Am I going to be able to get to that bubble? Yes. Okay, just before it killed me. Once your health bar goes all the way down, actually, once your, not health bar, but your overshield goes all the way down, that's death. So, again, really pay attention to what you're doing and where you're grabbing these. This, honestly, is a section that has been the death of many a solo flawless run, so you do got to be paying attention. And this mechanic is also going to come into play a little bit in the second traversal section, but it's going to be especially important in the very first boss encounter, which we're going to get into at the start of the next episode. It is a kind of a strange place to split this up. It's like, yeah, we're only doing 1 encounter in a traversal section, and that's the whole episode. Well, they're kind of long. So I feel like metering it out that way still makes the most sense. And luckily, the 2 boss fights in this dungeon are actually pretty close together, so they're going to make for a nice second part, especially as, like I said before, I am going to be cutting out some things that make them a little less long in the tooth, if you will. Now, as for the gear in this dungeon, I'm not the biggest fan of the weapons design from an aesthetic. Like, I can kind of understand where they're coming from in that way. And also, I love that I literally paused just to switch to the Solo Flawless emblem. What a flex. No, I kind of like the weapon designs, but I'm much more of a fan of the armor designs in this dungeon. The weapon designs are obviously supposed to be based on, like, the tech of the Pacific Arcology itself, whereas the armor is just straight up Hive armor. Like, it makes you look like an Acolyte or a Hive, which is pretty darn cool, but obviously, I think some people were expecting more out of the weapons. And as you can see, we're kind of communicating, me and my partner together here, just to make sure that we're grabbing the bubbles together whenever we get into a pressure situation so that neither of us die. That's kind of the whole idea. We're also getting into a part where I'm going to need to draw attention to a sort of a secret passage that we're going to take, which, is, I think, coming up here in just a second. There are some other alternative paths that are going to be necessary to things like the Dungeon Exotic, but we're not going to be getting into that today. There's also, like, the method of getting its catalyst and whatnot. That's sort of its own separate thing, and I'm not going to make a video on that, but that's why there are bubbles off in directions that you don't necessarily need to go in. Now, you could drop all the way down, but I always go to the left here because then you can go to where this secret chest is. That is accessible from the bottom going up, but it is not the main path to take. So do keep that in mind. There's 2 secret chests in this dungeon. That is the first one. The other one is after the second encounter and right before the final encounter. And now we're going to kill a bunch more enemies, and then we're just going to continue. Luckily, we're outside of the water for a minute here, so it's not too bad. That was probably the hardest part of the traversal section, especially if you don't know where you're going. But once you get through that part, it's usually pretty simple from here. It's just don't die to the enemies, because they do throw quite a bit at you. I mean, look at how many of them have orange health bars. There's moths everywhere. And also, as we go through this section, there's going to be a bunch of ultra health bar knights that you're going to have to kill with the more annoying weapons, the boomer weapons. So keep that in mind as you make your way through here. But once they are all dead, it's really not too bad. So we continue through and just keep making our way. And as we go further down, you're going to start to notice some familiar iconography. Or I guess iconography is not the word. Maybe it is the right word. I don't know. There are sections. So if you remember, back in The Taken King, when we defeated Oryx, Oryx's body fell towards Saturn. But not only did Oryx's body fall towards Saturn, pieces of the Dreadnought were also destroyed and broke off and fell that way. This is very important because as we're going through this dungeon, you're going to start to notice that there are remnants of the Dreadnought down here. Now, we thought it was going towards Saturn, but it actually got pulled in by Titan's gravity. So it didn't actually make it all the way down to Saturn, which is probably a good thing because we don't actually know the state of Saturn or whether that's a place we can even go to. Was it terraformed by the Traveler? We don't exactly know, but we do know that Titan has been, so it's good that some of the Dreadnought stuff ended up here so we can at least see it for ourselves. This is also stuff that Asa has been sort of alluding to as we've been making our way through Season of the Deep. It's like, hey, there's some crazy Hive stuff going on here, and that's the thing about the Hive is even if you kill them, they're never truly dead. So you do need to be kind of wary of where they can pop up here and there, and everywhere, for that matter. So, yeah, the fact that some of the Dreadnought tech ended up here on Titan does mean that there is quite a few things that are, unfortunately, going to be rearing their ugly head as we make our way through this place. But keep that in mind as we dive ever deeper. Now, making our way through, and I will say this is probably one of the best dungeons ever if you're a shotgun fan, because everything is so close range in most of these encounters. There's going to be, I mean, usually the way that this dungeon works is bunch of close range enemies, and then there's always one or two long range enemies to sort of disrupt the flow just to make things really annoying. So like we have these wizards here that are going to be annoying, but they're still not like too difficult to deal with. You're just going to need to constantly be wary of that, even if you're playing a very close-range style. But like I said, great dungeon for shotguns, and that's going to be made even more manifest when we head here into the next encounter. But we're still making our way through this traversal section with, again, more things that are very reminiscent of the Dreadnought. I mean, it's all this Hive tech that's just sort of down here. Is tech the right word for that? Architecture is probably a better term for that, and that's not what tech is for. That's my idea. Whatever, I digress. It doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of ruminating on things here. But the other thing, of course, being that Season of the Deep was heavily arc focused, so it makes sense to use a lot of arc in here. This dungeon is kind of designed around it. I mean, you got the moss that you have to deal with. You have so many enemies shooting arc from the wizards to the Hive, and then, of course, you also have the fact that there are thrall everywhere, and they just die like crazy to all of the jolt and all of the arc mechanics. So it just makes a lot of sense to use those things. Now, you got to be careful on this jump. This is the jump that has ended many a run right here. It seems like you're going to make it with ease, but it's actually pretty easy to short yourself there, and make sure you grab this bubble before you go up. You will not make it to that elevator and get out of there in time in most cases, especially if the elevator doesn't work, which it is known to do sometimes. It's very I guess lift is probably the more appropriate term for that, but yeah. Anyway, that is it for the underwater sections now, at least until, well, you'll see. So we're going to be killing a lot more enemies making our way through here. This whole area is a little bit confusing to get through. It's very Witch Queen coded because of all of the, you know, the upper areas you have to go into and all these little tunnels you have to find your way through. So just kind of focus on what I'm doing here, and it's actually pretty simple once you know your way through it. But you can get pretty lost. And like I said, when I had done this run, it had been a while since we'd run this dungeon, so I was definitely a little bit out of the loop here. I was like kind of forgetting where I was supposed to go. But for the most part, you can figure it out as you go through here. You just kind of got to follow the path upward. That Shrieker, though, man, I hate that Shrieker and its placement. It is definitely in a very annoying spot, especially if you're running all short-range weapons like I am in this exact moment. So we're going to see how much grief that gives me. But, of course, right as we get in range of it, all of these Thrall are going to spawn. But I do believe I was able to kill them pretty easily with Jolt. And now I have to solo primary myself with it. No. We got to switch to a rocket here. That's just not happening. Literally switch to the one that I unlocked, which I don't even think has all that good of a roll. And we missed the second shot. Oh, that's just awesome. Okay, it's not going to really matter anyway, because as soon as we get to the next fight, we're going to be able to rally to the flag and immediately get our stuff back here. So, okay, let's continue. And yes, I did switch to Solar Surge there for a very good reason. The Lament is currently on my person, and that is going to be a very, very necessary for the next encounter. And again, we'll explain that when we get into it, but I am definitely preempting things as I go through here. I don't just have a sword on for no reason as I make my way through a traversal section that really does not require a sword. And I mean, if you're traversing with a sword, you want Eager Edge. You don't want the Lament. The Lament is a damage weapon, not a fun weapon, not a silly weapon, not a platforming weapon, but whatever. All right, we're almost through this thing. Like I said, this traversal section is long, and that is why this is going to be the remainder of this episode. Just finding your way through this entire thing. It's also, again, why people kind of have complaints with this area. Is just because you have to go through so much of it. Like, there's not really a way to shortcut through this section. When you think of, like, other traversal sections and other dungeons, I mean, okay, Duality doesn't allow you to shortcut either, but some other ones do. Like, I'm thinking back to, oh my gosh, what is it called? Not Dares of Eternity. That's the freaking repeatable activity. Grasp of Avarice, thank you. That one has a lot of shortcuts in it. I mean, yes, you do have a lot of traversal sections, but you can make your way through those pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. Whereas this one, it's so claustrophobic and confined, it's a little bit harder to get through it in a very speedy manner, especially with the underwater sections, which literally limit your speed. Case in point. Now, this underwater section here is very important to take note of, though, because this is not just a traversal section. This is actually core to the mechanics of the upcoming encounter. This area we're in right here. And we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail, but as we go through this area, you're probably going to notice that there is an enemy in here. That's right. There's a knight that is bringing up shields. It's a light bearer knight. That's going to be a little bit of an issue, isn't it? Well, we're going to deal with that light bearer knight in the next episode, because that's going to be it for this one. Guys, thank you all so much for watching this episode of Let's Play Destiny. I hope you all enjoyed it very, very much, and I'll see you all in the next one.